Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me. I am Dr. Annette Feravich here with healthymindbodyspirit.net. Today, what I am doing is I am giving you a premiere of my episode number 6 from Love and Sex in the 21st Century. And so what I did was I edited the version, and I have not released it yet. And so today, if you recall, I finished the series last week. I am preparing for my son's wedding, who is getting married on September 5th. And so I'm busy doing that right now and preparing for my next series as well. So a couple things. I would like you to help me with my next series by giving me certain suggestions that you might like to see in upcoming series. And what you can do is you can email me at Dr. Feravich, Dr. period, F as in Frank, E-R-A, V as in Victor, I-C-H, at healthymindbodyspirit.net. And if you email me, you can email me suggestions. You can email me any questions that you might have. If you recall, we have today's questions. And I also have questions that I am answering on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. I answer your questions that have to do with psychology, right? That have to do with health and fitness with your body, and also any spiritual questions that you might have, that you might want to ask me about what I'm talking about, or what my beliefs are, or other ways that you might be able to repair your spiritual relationship to help you get a better, healthy mind and a better, healthy body. Okay? So, also what is upcoming after September 5th, so that's a Sunday is September 5th, and that's when my son is getting married. On September 12th, what I would like to do is I would like to interview individuals about their dating experiences. So if you would like to be a part of that YouTube video, my video program that I have, please email me also at Dr. Feravich at healthymindbodyspirit.net. And then that way I can get you on my program, because I find a real great need to find out a little bit more about dating. I've been talking with a lot of people who are young and older people, and their experiences with dating are very different. And I think it would be helpful if we had a little Q&A forum about what is going on relative to dating. So please email me there if you would like to be a part of a discussion on dating today. All right, we're looking to do that on September 12th. So please email me as soon as you can. I'm looking for about 10 or 15 people of all ages, and both males and females. Please email me if you would. Also remember that I'm here live on Sundays at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I get started a little bit late. And I usually get started a little bit late only because of technology. I'm here, I'm working, but it's because of technology. So don't forget to look for me on Sundays at 4 p.m. And please remember to subscribe to my videos. Please like my videos if you like them. And please, the biggest thing is, please share my videos with other people so that the word can get out. I really am doing these videos, and I have started my business because I know there are a lot of people who are hurting. And not just that, but also a lot of people with a lot of wrong answers for what they can do about their hurting. And this really bothers me, because there's a lot of really poor therapists that are out there. So if you're looking for a therapist who actually does not plan to be your therapist for forever and really gets right down to the nitty-gritty to help you repair some of those things that you find really hurtful and damaging in your life, please make sure that you email me and we can set up an appointment. I promise you that it's different than any therapy that you have engaged in. So check it out, because it's very different and it's very promising. Okay, so today what I would like to do is I'm going to get started with my edited video. That is video number 6 on a philosophy of love. Now, this is part of our series, and what it's doing is it is trying to get you to see that there is a hierarchy to love, that there's a preferred way to love people, and there's a preferred way not only to love people, but then to get that love in return. And so this series is not simply about just what is going on relative to love and sex today, right? No, it's not simply just about that. It really is about taking a healthy look at what love is. And so right now what I would like to do is I would like you to join me to view video number 6, A Philosophical Look at Love. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, it's taking me a little while to get online, but I'm online outside, and so that's wonderful for me. So let me go ahead and first of all introduce myself. I am Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am here with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. So today I'm getting started with our newest presentation, and this is episode number 6 in our series on love and sex in the 21st century. Again, this is episode number 6, so we're going to take a philosophical look at love today. Okay. And you'll be able so we're going to start actually winding down this series on love and sex in the 21st century. And if you have any ideas for what you would like to hear about in a new series, you can always email me at drferravich@healthymindbodyspirit.net. You can give me ideas that you would like to see for a series, but also don't forget that you can email me if you would like to ask me a question. You can also go to my website, and underneath the About button, there's a link there, and in that link, I answer your questions for you. So email me your questions, email me your ideas or suggestions at that email address, and you can always look for answers either here live, or you can look for answers on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. And there I also have all of my educational videos available for you. I know that sometimes it seems like this live, if you come to the live presentation, it's not quite nearly as smooth as I would like it to be. However, you do get some extra additional information that you sometimes won't be able to appreciate if you aren't here live. All right, so go and watch all of my videos. I also have a series out there on self-esteem, and it's a great series on self-esteem because there's a lot of people who have really misconceptions about what it takes to have real self-esteem. And in fact, some of those things we're going to be talking about today as we take a more philosophical look at love. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we have talked about in the past and what I plan to talk about as I begin to wrap up this series. On the right there are all the episodes that we've already completed. We talked about what is real love. So when we started with what is real love, we didn't really define it, right? We wanted to start really with the most complex ideas of what we have about love. We're going to keep adding to those ideas and adding to those concepts that we have about what real love actually is. Because that's where we want to end up. And that's, again, because that is what we are aiming for in our relationships. So we always want to keep our eye on the goal that we have. So we started at the top with what is real love, but it's very complex. And don't forget, even above that, we talked about God is love, right? So we also haven't addressed that yet either, okay? So again, we want to kind of look at our goal and then start building our foundation. Episode number 2 was on love and attachment. So that's where we talked about our ideas that we have regarding mental representations that we have of our relationships. So go to episode number 2 if you want some ideas about healthy mental representations of what love is. And remember, that starts with infant attachment, and then it gives us those kinds of images of what adult love is supposed to look like. Episodes 3 and 4, it was the same question. What is love and what's different today? Now, if you recall, I talked a little bit about the idea that when we are defining our concept, this gives you a scientific look at what love is. However, in doing so, what we are also able to do is give you a really interesting statistics about what we think is going on with love today. So, even though this is a drier kind of look at what love is, I give it an interesting spin because I give you all kinds of statistics on what love looks like today. All right. That took 2 episodes for me to do. And I'm also throwing in some interesting statistics in this episode as well. So we keep getting a picture of kind of what love looks like today, so we can see whether or not in general are we going in the right direction with the way that we approach love and loving relationships. And then more personally, are you going in the right direction when you attach and when you are looking for that significant other? Are you looking in the right direction? Okay, so that is episode number 3 and 4. And episode number 5 is, do we need to love ourselves before we can love others? This is a really interesting question, and we're going to delve into the philosophical reasons why we may not need to have to love ourselves first, okay? But clearer answers in episode number 5. Now today, episode number 6, we're taking a philosophical look at love, and when we're talking about a philosophical look at love, we're talking about, does it meet our needs? Okay? It's important that we have our needs met. And we look at measures that can tell us whether or not our needs are being met. Those typically are measures of happiness. Now, let's take a look at the last 2 episodes that I have for this series. So, episode number 7, remember, we're working our way down the pyramid, right? Down the pyramid. So, episode number 7, we are talking about loneliness and depravity. So that is next Sunday. We'll be seeing that August 1st. And then episode number 8, we are going to wrap things up by going back to the top of the pyramid. I know that there are a lot of people who have a lot of disappointment in their prayers, in their hopes for a better life, in their relationship with God. And if you do have great relationship with God, whoever you say that higher power might be, still there is generally disappointment. It's a reason why people fall out of love. It's a reason why people end up becoming unfaithful in their relationships. It's the reasons why people fall out of faith, because people disappoint them and they don't have a higher power that they believe that they can depend on. So when we say God is love, we need to find some truth in that, right? Otherwise, it feels like it's a lot of empty words. So let's revisit that at the end, because really we want to get to the top of the pyramid. We want the most satisfying kinds of relationships. So can we get these kinds of satisfying relationships without having a vision or an openness or an understanding of a higher power? Can we get to those kinds of really deep relationships? Okay, let's move on. So we've already looked a little bit at today's agenda, right? So what we did was we did a review. That was our past and future. So that's what we've done. I've got a couple questions for today's question. We have quite a few questions, but the first thing that I want to talk about is a question that somebody asked me, and that question is, what makes me an expert in love and sex? Why is it that I can talk about that? So I want to talk a little bit about the reasons why I'm talking about that, and I chose this subject to teach you about. The next agenda item that I have is a new pyramid. So if you recall, we've had an old pyramid, and that old pyramid was infant attachment, right? Which leads to adult attachment, which leads to mature love, which leads to flourishing relationships. So that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking to move up in the hierarchy of love so that we really have fulfilling relationships. But a lot of times what we end up having is a battle between what real love is, which very often has to be selfless, and fulfilling our own needs. And that's one of the reasons why I propose that we see this epidemic of loneliness that we're going to be talking about next week, and a great depravity in fulfilling our sexual needs. How can I say that? How can I say that there's a great depravity in fulfilling our sexual needs? Did you know that the porn industry actually makes more money than the alcohol industry? Now, this is astounding. Do you know how much money we spend on alcohol? And alcohol it's acceptable, right? It's acceptable to drink, but it's certainly not acceptable to have some of these sex addictions that we've seen. And this is not only predominant then if it is making more money than the alcohol industry, it is widespread. We see this in older generation, we see this in married men, we see this in single men more than women, right. And even young teenagers and young individuals who are getting addicted to sex because it's so easily accessible for them. So next week we're going to talk more about loneliness and depravity, but for now I wanted to mention that because we are once again finding that there is this battle between meeting our needs and engaging in a selfless love. Okay, so I'm going to present a new pyramid to you that takes a look at another way or strategies that we can look at for developing these deeper relationships. Then we're going to talk about basic needs. Now, we've already talked a little bit about basic needs, but again, what I want to do now is I'm taking a look at a philosophical look, which is now going to bring together some of the more complex ideas that we've been talking about love so far. Okay, and then what I'm going to talk about are 2 lies that we believe. So when we don't have our basic needs met, what do we do with that then? How do we handle our basic needs not being met? Well, we can handle that in healthy ways, but other times, often, when our needs aren't met, especially when we have deep needs for love, when those needs aren't met, what we do is we begin to believe lies. And the most interesting thing about the lies that we believe is that they are not lies that we believe about other people, but they are lies that we believe about ourselves. All right? And then the last agenda item that I have today is today's question of the week. If you recall, every week I have a question of the week. Sometimes it really is more for me than it is for anybody else. But sometimes you might be interested in the question and it might inspire you to do a little bit more digging on what I'm talking about and what I want to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started now and move along with today's question. Today's question I have for you is actually coming from somebody who I talked with, and they had a question: how am I qualified to talk about love and sex? Okay, and so there are a couple reasons why I feel like I'm qualified to talk about love and sex. Now, I've talked a little bit about my background, and every once in a while I want to give you just a little bit of an update. I think I've said that so that you feel like you can trust the person who's talking to you about these really difficult and intimate topics, okay? So what qualifies me to talk about it? Well, first of all, as you may know, my degree is in social, developmental, and cognitive psychology. Now, what that means is I'm not a clinical psychologist, which means by trade, I am not a therapist. I really didn't have an interest in being a therapist. I really had much more of an interest in learning what the actual research had to say, in particular about character traits that we study in positive psychology. So, as you know, I am an expert actually in mental and physical health and well-being. So my specialty is in positive psychology. And in positive psychology, we look at the social impact, developmental impact, and the cognitive impact on developing specific character traits that are valuable and enhance our relationships. So I'm an expert in knowing how to develop things like love, like respect, like wisdom, like optimism. And I also know the contributions that they make both to our mental and physical well-being. That is what I study. I study well-being. And I study that, again, from a mental aspect. I study that from a physical or nutritional aspect. Should we be concerned with the amount of pharmaceuticals we're taking, for example. I just read a book which is called The Emperor's New Drugs. And The Emperor's New Drugs talks about how we are experiencing the majority of the time with antidepressants a placebo effect. Now, that truth really bothers a lot of people. It also has people thinking that I'm suggesting that pharmaceuticals and antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills have no purpose. And I'm not suggesting that. I am suggesting, however, that a lot of times individuals, because I study behavior, that a lot of times individuals are looking for an answer, and oftentimes, the answer is not in the pharmaceuticals. We are moving more and more in a direction of accepting what scientists are saying one way or another, and we need to be critical thinking human beings to determine what is best for ourselves. Now, that's not suggesting one thing or another. All it's suggesting is that we are the ones who need to be the experts about our minds and our bodies and our spirits as well. And that's really what I'm hoping to do, is help you become an expert in those areas. Okay? All right, so again, how am I qualified to talk about love and sex? Because I have a background where I've researched those topics. I've researched theories on love. I've researched how changes in love change outcomes as we go through the developmental process. I've studied gender differences, and I've also studied health outcomes relative to some of these differences that we see. Okay, so that answers that question. Hopefully you can see that really I've put together many years of not only scientific knowledge, but also hopefully you can hear the practical knowledge that I bring as well. Practical knowledge that includes things like a 36-year intimate and faithful relationship. Also includes being a mother to two wonderful boys that I've raised. So there's a lot of scientific information that I bring to the table, and because I have that scientific information, it gives me a different perspective when I'm looking at the practical information. And it's always been my purpose and my dream to be able to bring those things to the general public. So that's hopefully what makes me an expert, and I hope that you see that I'm an expert in your eyes as well. Okay, moving on now. Let's take a look at a couple fun questions, all right? The first question that I have, again, remember, some of these questions help us better define what is love and what is love today. All right, so what is the divorce rate today is the question, and here are the possibilities. So A, 25%. Is the divorce rate today 25%? Do you think that the divorce rate today is 50%? Do you think it's 60%? Or do you think D, 75%? What is the divorce rate today? And if you said 50%, you would be correct. Now, there's an interesting little tidbit about this that I also want to ask you about. All right, so today, the divorce rate is 50%. All right, so let's take a look at the next question. What was the divorce rate 40 years ago? Do you think that the divorce rate 40 years ago, so we're talking about like the 1980s, right? Do you think that the divorce rate was 15%? Do you think it was 20%? Do you think it was 30%? Or do you think it was 50%? Okay, so the divorce rate 40 years ago was also 50%. Now, this makes for a very interesting statistic. Although we have seen that the divorce rate is 1 in 2 marriages end up in divorce. We've known this for a long time, obviously since the 1980s. And in fact, some of the reasons why we see that divorce rate had actually increased significantly in the 1960s and 70s to 50% was because of a couple reasons. Number one, birth control. So women were no longer tied to having children. And so this gave women a lot more control over their bodies and their relationships as well. Now, some of you might like that. Some of you probably don't like that, right? Some more conservative individuals begin to see, well, that is the downfall in our families today, right? Another finding that we know is that consistently the divorce rate increases with the likelihood that an individual has other options. And this is what, for example, birth control and also no-fault divorce allowed individuals to have. It allowed them to have other options. So that increased the divorce rate significantly in the 60s and 70s to about 1 in 2, 50%. It climbed a little bit higher than that in the 1980s to about 60%, but then went back down again to 1 in 2 individuals. All right, so this is kind of an interesting stat, isn't it? 1 in 2 individuals, it really has not significantly increased above that for the last 40, maybe even 50 years. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that individuals who have certain values, such as loyalty in your marriage, those individuals are sticking with their marriage. And even when times change, those individuals still stick with their marriages. I'm not advocating that everybody sticks in their marriages, but we do know that divorce is very painful, right? Not only for the individuals, but divorce is also very painful for children involved. And so it might be wise then for us to think about some of the things that we're looking for when we get in long-term relationships, but also whether or not we have a value for longevity in our relationships, and the person that we're with also values longevity in their relationships, okay? Because it appears that valuing longevity in a relationship is what seems to be preventing divorce across the board. Okay, now I have one more question for you. What is the percentage of adults married today? Now, what this question is asking you is, of the adults who are eligible to be married, so basically whatever the marrying age is in your state. So, of eligible adults, what is the percentage of eligible adults that you believe are married today? So, 50% of adults are married. If they can be married, they are married. 50% of adults, 60% of adults, 75% of adults, or 80% of adults. So the percentage of adults who are married today, 50%, 60%, 75%, or 80%? And the answer is 50%. Now, this is interesting because 40 years ago, what was the percentage of adults married 40 years ago? The percentage of adults married 40 years ago was 80%. So, this is a really interesting statistic. What we are finding is that people are no longer allowing themselves to be in intimate, long-lasting relationships. Individuals are not trusting other individuals to be vulnerable. They are not trusting individuals with their love. They are not trusting individuals with their hearts and with their secrets and with their true self. We are no longer trusting other individuals with knowing who we truly are. Remember, the very first step in intimate relationships would be that we have to know one another and we have to be willing to be known by that other person. That's the first step. And what we're finding is that individuals do not want to take that step. They do not want to get in intimate relationships where they may often be hurt by another individual. That's a very sad statistic that today 50% of eligible adults are married, compared with 80% of eligible adults in the 1980s. People are no longer trusting loving relationships. Okay, now what I said was the next thing on our agenda was that we were going to have a new pyramid. And this is our new pyramid that we're going to be talking from. All right, so the very first at the top there, we said God is love, right? But actually, we're going to ignore that question right now until we get to our very last episode where we look at that question a little bit more in depth. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top of our pyramid, at the top of the human being pyramid without considering some higher beings. And at the top of that pyramid is the family. All right, now we're taking a philosophical look at love, and we also talked last week about whether or not we can love others without loving ourselves first, right? Now, what we see here is that family is at the top, and so we are getting most of our love needs met through our family. Now, how can I say that so emphatically? How can I be so sure that we are primarily getting our love needs met through our families? Okay, well, first of all, what we have to understand is that families are defined in many different ways. We know that we can't choose our families, and we also know that individuals have experienced great trauma because of their families. And no matter what, because all of us are imperfect, we will always disappoint, in particular, likely, those people who love us and those people that we love, okay? All right, so what we see here is that we need these intimate relationships. However, these intimate relationships can cause us a lot of pain. Why do we need them then? Why do we need them? And in fact, isn't that what people are saying? When there's only 50% of eligible adults married, isn't that what people are saying? I don't need intimate relationships. Well, if you remember last week when we were talking, what we said was that when we make ourselves more lovable, what we end up having people who love us, right? And those people love us despite, for example, our faults or our shortcomings. And that's really what we are all looking for, right? That kind of unconditional love. That unconditional love cannot come unless we are intimately invested in and involved in those people who are most important. We cannot feel that kind of kindness. We can't feel respected. We can't feel responsible to or for. We can't feel hopeful about when we don't have intimate relationships with other people. They are the vehicle by which we end up getting those most important needs met. We're going to look at that more closely. So, when we're talking about family here, you can see the arrows there that I have. I have the arrows there to acknowledge the kinds of pressures that we end up getting from family members, right? And those pressures turn us maybe sometimes into people who we aren't. They are pressures that don't allow us to become our true selves, right? So what we may end up doing is then picking different family members is what we do. We pick different family members. We can choose, especially as we become adults, those people who best define family for us. And remember, we talked last week about those constructive and destructive behaviors. You engage in intimate relationships with individuals that you consider to be your family when those people engage in constructive relationships or constructive behaviors, and so do you. And so do you. That's an obligation that you have as well. If we don't do that for one another, we will not have loving, intimate relationships. That is where we get them from. Now, again, you can define that family in many ways, and likely you should, because you want to be the one who is in control of healthy relationships and the people who are coming and going in your life, right? You want to be in control of that. So, when we say family, we need to be able to depend on other people who are willing to invest in us. Now remember, very often, and in particular, what is different about love today? What's different about love today is that we are more concerned with this base here, the base ourselves, than we are in investing in family relationships. We see that in the decline in our intimate relationships, okay? All right, so how are we going to get love? We are going to get love through family. You can define that family however you want, but remember, that family needs to invest in constructive behaviors that edify you, that build you up. Those are the people that you want to call family. All right, number 2 there. So again, we're looking at this new pyramid, and we can see that family has a smaller space than others do, right? We also invest in others. Family, it's hard to invest in family because there is a give and take, and sometimes we end up losing. And when those individuals are family, the loss we feel is very painful, okay? So, what we sometimes choose to do is invest in other people. We don't have a loving, intimate relationship. We're not ready to get married. So what do? We invest in other people. We invest in other relationships with peers, with other people that we love, in our friendships, but we invest in other people. Now, what is going to give us the most return? Family is going to give us the most return. But second to family, it's going to be other people. What we've talked about in particular in episode 5 is that, yes, we need to love ourselves in order to be willing to go outside of ourselves and invest in other people. But simply investing in other people does not make us love ourselves. What makes us love ourselves is actually when we see the way that other people see us. That's when we love ourselves. And on that same note, when we don't love ourselves, it is because we see ourselves as the way that we think other people see us. Why do we need to invest in other people? Because investing in other people reflects on us who we believe that we are. Why is it that it's so traumatic for us when we get in conflicts with other people, when we go to therapy and we tell our therapist how horrible our mother is and how horrible our siblings are and how we were bullied in school and how the teacher was so wrong, and we go to therapy and we tell our therapist about all of those situations, when the fact is, what those situations tell us is they tell us something about ourselves that we don't like. And that's when we stop investing in other people. Think about the differences between introverts and extroverts. One measure with extroverts that is highly correlated, when I say correlations, I mean a relationship. A correlation between extroverts and happiness. extroverts have a tendency to be happier than introverts are. Now, one of the reasons why extroverts may have higher levels of happiness and be highly correlated or related to happiness measures is because they see themselves reflected in other people positively. And introverts, because they get very anxious or more anxious, we call it evaluation apprehension. Introverts experience more evaluation apprehension. What they may see then is things that they dislike being reflected in other people. I'm an introvert because, why? I'm afraid people are going to evaluate me poorly, because I really get nervous when I speak in front of other individuals. And what I may see then reflected back from their behaviors is that I'm just not that cool, that I'm just not that smart, that I'm just not that able to communicate, that I'm just not that charismatic, for example. If I'm an introvert, I may see reflected in from other people a dislike for me, or reflected in other people that they don't care for me as much, okay? And so what does this do then when we see reflected back from other people a negative assessment of ourselves? What do we do then? What we do is we withdraw. We begin moving down to the base of that pyramid. And at the base of that pyramid is ourselves. Now, this pyramid is a great analogy for another reason, because we see that at the base, we have our strength there at the base, okay? We cannot get to the top without having those other components. But what we need to have is we need to have a strong base. And so what we're seeing is we are seeing that it takes, first of all, family and other people and relationships with families and other people in order to then begin to move up. But those have to feed into the base. So, philosophical look at this. Do we need to fulfill our needs? Yes, we do need to fulfill our needs. Yes, it is important for us to have that strong base. But that allows us then the strength, the confidence, the autonomy to move into intimate relationships. We will not reach our goals if we are stuck on that base. And if you want to know what's different in love between today and 40 years ago, the difference is that we have invested and we continue to invest more and more in that base without investing in others and committing to long-term relationships and family. That is the major difference between what's going on today and what went on 40 years ago and loving relationships. And we know this in a series of even labels. The millennials, right? What are the millennials called? They are called the me generation. That's when individuals turned around and started saying, what's in it more for me? And in many of our statistics, we are seeing this kind of self-absorption that is leading us more and more inside. We are not getting answers in loving, intimate relationships. Okay? All right, let's move on. Now, I want to talk about some theories relative to basic needs. The three top needs, according to theorists Ryan and Dici: autonomy, competence, and interrelatedness, with interrelatedness being the number one need. Now, I've talked about what those needs are in some past episodes, so if you want to know more about those needs, take a look at episodes number 2 and episodes number 3, where I talk more about those needs. There's another theory that's out there by Susan Fiske, and she also talks about basic needs, with belongingness being the number one need that encompasses all the other needs: understanding, control, esteem needs, and trust needs. You can use the acronym BUCKET in order to remember those 5 basic needs. So, B, belongingness, is the number one need by which all other needs basically submit. When we look for understanding, for example, we look for understanding for purposes of knowledge, but also to understand other individuals in order to feel like we fit in and we belong. That is a cognitive need, understanding. We also have control needs, where we not only need to control others, right, and their behaviors, but we have a need to control the environment. We also have a need to control ourselves. This is another cognitive need that we have. We want to persuade people to think like we do, and this is how we help form them and us relationships, our intimate relationships with other people, because we realize that they are like us and we don't have to persuade them to be different, right? The last 2 needs are emotional needs. So esteem needs are self-esteem needs. We have needs to feel worthy. And then the last esteem need that we have there is we have a need to trust other people as well. In fact, trustworthiness is one of the very first nonverbal signals that we pick up from other people. When they have an open stance with their bodies, when they're smiling at other people, it says, I can be vulnerable with you. And if I can be vulnerable with you, that suggests that I am trustworthy. We see these behaviors that we attribute characteristics of trust and also competence to individuals in about 1/1000th of a second. Trust and competence we attribute to other people. All right, so basic needs, but the most important need that these theorists suggest are the need for interrelatedness from Ryan and Dietschy, and from Susan Fiske, she says our greatest need is belongingness. Now let's take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I briefly went over it, but I'm stopping here to take a look more at a philosophical look at what our needs are. So we can see here that the basic needs are at the bottom of the pyramid. And we are, just like we are dependent on loving ourselves before we can love others, we are dependent on those basic needs being fulfilled before we can fulfill higher order needs, such as love and belongingness or self-esteem needs. Okay? What this relates to, however, that we were talking about in episode number 5 is this relates to our different levels of happiness. Hedonic happiness, we get our basic needs fulfilled, like safety needs or physiological needs. But if that's all that we are trying to fulfill, what we end up missing out on are those higher order or needs, or what Aristotle referred to as eudaimonic needs. Those are the belonging and love needs, esteem needs, and the self-fulfilling needs, which are self-actualization. Now, when you look at the top of that chart there for self-fulfilling needs, one might think that that means that then I'm back to fulfilling the bottom base of that pyramid. I'm back to fulfilling my own selfish needs. But that's not what this self-fulfillment needs are. These self-fulfillment needs have to do with meaning and purpose, fulfilling our true self, Aristotle might say. For each of us were given unique talents. And what Maslow was suggesting was that we would not be completely fulfilled if we did not fulfill those talents. Our needs would not be met if we did not fulfill those unique talents. Right now, we've got the Olympics that are going on, and these individuals have tremendous talent. It looks like probably innate talent that then motivated them to work so hard at a sport. This is a self-actualizing need. I have a need to utilize those innate, unique talents that I have in ways that contribute to the world. Remember when we were talking about Erickson's psychosocial stages of personality development is what it is. Later on in our lives, what we're looking for is we are looking for, did we give back to the world? Did we generate something for others to benefit from? Everything that we find about having satisfaction in life, having real intimate relationships, knowing love, feeling hope in the future, all comes from hanging out at that top rung of that pyramid and not at the bottom. If we only hang out at the bottom, we only have our physical needs met. And every theorist is saying that for us to be healthy and have longevity, we need to have those eudaimonic higher order needs met. And if we are simply only worried about ourselves, we can only fulfill those bottom needs, the physiological needs. We can also feel safer and have those needs met, but we will never be fully self-actualized. We will never feel fully accomplished. We will never feel fully loved and respected when we simply hang out in those bottom tiers of the pyramid, fulfilling our basic needs. You really want to think about whether or not you're the person who hangs out in the bottom tiers, wondering when you are going to get your needs fulfilled. Think about that in all kinds of behaviors. Think about that when you get on social media. Are you getting on social media to have your own needs fulfilled? Are you having sex with somebody to have your own needs fulfilled? Are you having children to have your own needs fulfilled? You will never experience those top psychological and self-fulfilling needs if you end up hanging out at only those bottom tiers of the pyramid. It's important. And remember, in episode number 5, we talked about how that equates to health and well-being. We'll talk about more of that when we talk in episode number 7. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what we can do when we are trying to refine ourselves in ways that we can then approach and be engaged in healthy relationships. We are trying to refine our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors so that we can engage in healthy relationships. I've given you a number of reasons why we want to do that, right? Okay, so how can we refine our skills? And this question is basically, how do we know when we need therapy, when we need to do something more than just try it ourselves and adjust our thinking ourselves? So how do we know when we need therapy? Well, we know when we need therapy when we experience what I call triggers. To be triggered means that my definition is a $500 reaction to a $5 problem. So we know a lot of people who are triggered, right? We know a lot of people who get upset and fly off the handle. In fact, I don't even know who you are today if you don't know how to handle your problems with some kind of over-the-top reaction that is a controlling mechanism to get other people to stop. Why is it that people get triggered, fly off the handle, and they're out of control? Is it because they enjoy that feeling? No, they do it because one of our basic needs is to control other people. And when individuals scream, when they berate other people, or when they sharpen their skills in arguing, these individuals then are refining those skills in order to control other people, in order to get them to stop what they are doing. So, when you are triggered, when you have an overreaction to a problem, that indicates that you want to do some examination. I can help teach you how to examine those things so that you can then go and examine those things yourself. I do that myself, right? When I get triggered by something, let me give you an example. We know that individuals who lose somebody who is a significant other to them will end up feeling very sad. And this sadness can go on for quite a while. It can keep us from engaging with other people. It can keep us from getting our work done. It can keep us from thinking clearly even about things. There is a normal amount of time that we spend going through some real grief when we lose somebody. But if you still are experiencing real grief at the drop of a hat, when somebody simply mentions the person's name 5 years later, and even, of course, 10 years later, then you likely are being triggered. And when individuals are triggered, what we know is that they believe lies. So, let's take a look at the lies that individuals believe when they're triggered. And this is the reason why this therapy is really beneficial. It's beneficial because what we do is, for every issue, whether or not you're not getting along with your spouse, you're not getting along with your parents, you're not getting along with your friends, you're not getting along with your dog, okay? Whatever it is, you can talk in therapy over and over again. That therapist is only going to get part of your story. For one reason, because you probably don't want to reveal, your crimes, right? But also, there are things that you won't reveal simply because you don't know that there is a truth different than what you see. When therapists are trying to deal with their clients in therapy by working out every issue that client brings to the table, that's really going to be endless therapy. It's the reason why we see people in therapy for 9 years, 6 years in therapy, right? Why? Because I can every single week bring to you a new circumstance, and we can mull it over and debate that circumstance and find out who's right and who's wrong, and maybe never get anywhere. What we know is that there are chronically accessible beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other races, about other genders, about all kinds of things. And what we end up doing then is traveling down that road in our heads. As a therapist, however, the things I need to worry about are just these two lies. And they are lies that you believe about yourself. And those two lies are, I'm not worthy. And the other lie is, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. Okay. We're going to talk more about why these are lies, but some important philosophical things I want you to know about this. First of all, when we're taking a look at these, again, they are lies we believe about ourselves. How do we know these are lies? How do we know these are lies? How do I know it's a lie when I say, I'm not worthy? You don't know all the horrible things that I've done. And not knowing all the horrible things I've done, you don't know for sure whether or not I might not be worthy of love. We are worthy because we are human beings. We are uniquely worthy because we are human beings. Now, I believe this because I believe in a higher power, okay? So I believe that I'm worthy. But even our Constitution tells us that because we are humans, we have certain inalienable rights. Inalienable rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And therefore, on some levels, we are worthy. Okay? We are worthy. So we're going to talk more about that. And I do talk more about that in my therapy. So if you're interested, find out how you are worthy and how that is a lie. And then you can also find out how we uncover the lie. I'll teach you. Okay? All right. The second lie is I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And why is this a lie? Why is this a lie? Believing that I can't do anything. One of them, the first lie, is an esteem need that we saw. The second one is a control need that we have. It fulfills our control need. And that control need has to do with the idea that I don't have a choice. There's nothing that I can do about the situation that I am in. Now, why is I'm stuck a lie? What this does is it violates our rule of autonomy. When we are autonomous, what that says is I have free choices to be able to decide what I want to do. I want to give you a story about a student that I had recently and about how she demonstrated, unlike a lot of my students, how she is not stuck. I have a lot of students who are complaining that there's nothing that they can do about their situation. And sometimes it is hard to do things about our situation. Sometimes if we have no money, right? I have a situation where I lost my significant other. And in the process now, I have got to worry a lot about finances that I didn't have to worry about before. And now I may be in a position where I am stuck determining whether or not it's going to be possible for me to keep this house and this property. So again, if somebody wants to help sponsor this, it'll help with the technology as well. That always gets me on a little bit late. Some technology glitch. Okay, but I know that when I approach my problems with looking for solutions and not with the idea that I have no solution, that's when I know that I can find truths. I can find answers, right? If I believe I'm stuck, where are my answers? I have no answers. I have no solutions, right? Okay, so back to my story about my student. So my student was a student who was in my 3000 level class. Remember, I teach at a local university, but that local university is neither affiliated nor does that university endorse what I'm doing at Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. But one of my students was coming to me because his 3000 level class was a writing intensive class. And in this writing intensive class, she had some difficulty, so she was meeting with me on a weekly basis, okay? And doing really well. And now it's coming down to the wire, and we had some monkey wrenches thrown in with me losing my husband and COVID. And so there were a lot of students who had a lot of excuses for why they couldn't get things done. And all of this gets them feeling stuck, like they have no choices. So it was the last meeting that I was having with the student, and so the last time, and then the paper was due the next day. So we were meeting, the paper was due the next day, and she takes her computer here, and she turns her computer around for me at our last meeting, and she shows me Central Park. New York City, Central Park. She'd never been there. She'd never just dropped everything and took a trip ever, much less to New York City and Central Park. And what she told me was that if she didn't do it, that all of her family would be surrounding her, asking her questions and asking for her help, and she would have never been able to concentrate enough to get her paper done. So she was certainly not stuck. Okay? That's what I help you with. So when you have issues that don't allow you to move on in your relationship because you're with somebody who treats you poorly, but you're stuck, or that you're with somebody who treats you poorly, but you don't feel like you're worthy of being treated better than that, that's the time where you come and see me, and we work on only 2 lies. You're not in therapy for years. You are only in therapy long enough to get through to some of those truths. And in the meantime, I teach you how to get to those truths as well. Okay? So sometimes you might need to come back to me for a little bit of an injection, right? But really, I'm teaching you the tools so that you can do it yourself, just like I learned how to do it myself as well. Okay. What we end up doing when we believe these 2 lies is we engage in a vicious cycle. Now, I'm calling this a vicious cycle, but I also called it chronically accessible thoughts. This is when we begin to ruminate about reasons why we're not worthy and bad behavior, or reasons why we are stuck and reasons why we have difficulty getting unstuck. We engage in a vicious cycle. And what I try and instruct you in is how to get out of that vicious cycle, okay? So you can always get a free consultation, and if you go to the About link on my webpage, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net, and on the About link, you can see how you can make an appointment there, and you can also sign up for a free consultation so that you can hear just a little bit more about this therapy. And just to be clear, how does this relate to love and sex in the 21st century? Because we're moving down the pyramid, and at that baseline, we still do need to love ourselves, right? We need to figure out how we can love ourselves. And that's what I'm going to help you with so that you can go out and engage in those nurturing and edifying relationships so that you are known and so that you know others intimately as well. There is great satisfaction in that. There is great confidence in that. There is great autonomy in that. So you get other needs met when you engage in these wonderful, intimate relationships. Okay, so I said that I always end up my sessions with a question of the week. And here is today's question of the week. And this question of the week, most of you probably won't understand this question that I have. It's very specific, and it has to do with the wonderful class I took over the summer and that I talked to you a little bit about, and I said I would tell you a little bit about it. So I took a wonderful class from the Discovery Institute, and you can look that up online if you want. And at the Discovery Institute, they take a look at some issues with real scientific eyes. And one of the issues that we talked a little bit about was the issue of climate change. And actually, there were Dr. Richards and Dr. Gonzalez that were talking about the science that was behind what they suggested were misinformation about global warming. And so, this was my question for Dr. Richards and Dr. Gonzalez. One of the issues that we have with this kind of misinformation is that very often the misinformation is being motivated or inspired by beliefs that really don't have place in a scientific debate. And so, a couple things that Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Richards had talked about regarding this mystifying science behind global warming is that we do not know an optimal temperature. And additionally, they talked about science behind the intensity of the sun. Both of these I found to be faulty claims that were inspired by their own political beliefs. And so my question is, how is it that your political beliefs are being entertained in the realm of science to the point that you are not clearly answering scientific questions using hard science? And so I want to know how it is that we are going to trust your scientific analysis when it appears to be biased by both your personal and your political beliefs. I have, over the course of this series, talked about my concern regarding science and scientific methods. I've talked about how it changes our answers to questions in measures. And now what I see is that Discovery Institute is doing some really wonderful scientific things. And I fear that the science is going to be tainted by political and personal biases by individuals who have a different agenda that is different than science. So, Dr. Richards and Dr. Gonzalez, I would like to know if you are being motivated by political biases and personal beliefs that get you to see your science in distorted ways. 2 questions. Why don't you know optimal temperature? And also heat intensity. You said the sun is not getting any more intense. Why would the sun get any more intense? I don't think anyone's claiming that the intensity of the sun changes. I think what they're claiming is that I feel the intensity of the sun more than I used to. All right, so thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Annette Feravich from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. Remember that if you have questions, you can go to my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net, and make sure that you add your questions to today's question underneath the About link. And also, you can email me your questions as well to Dr. Feravich at healthymindbodyspirit.net. Also, remember my YouTube channel is Dr. Annette Feravich, and make sure that you hit the subscribe button. And thank you once again for joining me. And next, episode number 7 is loneliness and depravity. So we are now moving down. And now we are seeing what happens when we have a life of simply self-serving. And then episode number 8, we're going to be answering the hard question, is God love? And we're not going to be looking at is God love from kind of a cotton candy, easy answer, Christian, evangelical, canned response. We want to know, really, if God is telling us that He is love, then certainly shouldn't we see a whole lot more love in this world, in this universe? So join me for answering that question. That will be in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to be talking about loneliness and depravity as we move down the pyramid. Thank you all for joining me. This is Dr. Annette Feravich with HealthyMindBodySpirit.net, and I am here live right now, but what you just saw was episode number 6, a philosophical look at love. The next episode that we're going to see is part 2 of episode number 6, at love, where we are looking at dating relationships and a bridge between loving relationships and loneliness and depravity. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Please make sure that you visit my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net, and thank you again for joining me.